All right, if you are a fan of the Portland Trail Blazers, and even if you're not, you are probably familiar with the term Jailblazers. At some point in your life, you've heard that, whether you still apply it to the Blazers, although that would be a little bit off, or definitely think about that as something of the history. It was a big part of what happened with the NBA team here, and I personally very much well remember that, and also remember trying to dispute that with other people, but nonetheless, there's a great documentary out about it right now with an interview with two of the foremost Jailblazers of that time frame. That was Rasheed Wallace and Bonzi Wells. We've got Tim Livingston from Underdog Sports here to talk about this.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
So I want to, really get into this. I've watched it. It's a fascinating interview with these two. But let's talk about your side of this. Like, how did you get involved with Bonzi Wells and Rasheed Wallace to where you got them to talk about this Jailblazers era?
Yeah, two guys that are not easy to get in touch with and not easy to build trust with, given the media's reputation with those two. So I produced a podcast called Whistleblower, and it took me months and months and months to get in touch with Rasheed and Bonzi, but was able to do so. And over the last 2-3 years, have gotten to know them really well and just have been absolutely fascinated by their story and just view them as two really misunderstood human beings. I don't think you're going to find anybody better. It's hard to find better people, a better person than Bonzi Wells or a better person than Rasheed Wallace. And obviously their portrayal in the media during those Jailblazers years portrayed them a lot differently than I know them. So having gotten to know them, I really came to admire them and wanted to help tell their story.
I mean, that had to be quite a bit of trust to have built up with them because, like you said, they don't seem like they're guys that are easily approachable. Not that I know, as you mentioned, they're great people in real life, but they have that reputation for being, maybe they're not going to talk about this that much.
Yeah, they never have. And that's why it was really incredible to get this access and to get this interview. They've never talked about the Jailblazers era. As this is part 1 of 2, we actually taped another hour with them where Rasheed opens up even more about his time in Portland, about referees. And so we have a lot of stories that we haven't even released on our channel yet. Scottie Pippen's relationship with Bonzi and Sheed, just so many interesting elements from that story and from that team that is such an important team, not in just the history of the Portland Trailblazers, but the history of the NBA.
It's one of those woulda, coulda, shoulda kind of stories where it's like they were right there, but they just couldn't quite get over that hump. I mean, I still remember the fourth quarter against the Lakers. That I will never be able to watch that.
Tough one. Yeah, and it was interesting. One of the things we revealed is that Rasheed watched it that night, which I thought was sadistic, and I told him so in the moment. And Bonzi, it took until Kobe's passing for Bonzi to watch that game and watch that fourth quarter. And yeah, doing the revisionist history on that, if the Blazers hold on to that lead, the Lakers, that was the third, I believe, year of Kobe and Shaq together, maybe the fourth. And from what I've heard, Jerry West dismantles that team if the Lakers don't win that game. That would have been another championless season for that Lakers team, and the entire history of the NBA changes if the Portland Trailblazers hold on and win that game. And so it's a real shame. That team, the Portland team, that next season, Bob Whitstead, the general manager, made some additions that didn't work out so well. And yeah, that the dynasty could have easily been Portland had things gone a little bit differently in that fourth quarter. If Rasheed, as he says, made some of those bunnies, those easy shots, things could have been really different in the course of NBA history.
That parallel universe out there somewhere, where the Blazers won another one. Looking at it, just kind of from Jailblazers from that national perspective of things, and especially since you've done the research on this, I know you're from LA, so you probably had a different perspective on it just to begin with. But what was like the national kind of opinion about the Jailblazers?
Yeah, so that era, again, it's fun to look back at the NBA of that era when David Stern was at the height of his powers and the NBA controlled the media the way the NBA was reported on way more than it does now with where social media is today. The NBA really had a lot of control over how teams were, how the league was portrayed. And that team for the NBA was David Stern's worst nightmare. Those were brash. This was when the NBA was really trying to expand into the Southeast. And that team was brash, outspoken, and didn't look or act the way that David Stern wanted them to act. And that was a problem for the NBA. And so the way the media was able to report on that team now, I think would have been scrutinized a lot more. And it's just really interesting to look back. I mean, this is really a story of the media and how the media portrays Black athletes. And that's why I was really, despite being a white kid from LA, getting to know Sheed and Bonzi, that's what is at the core of this story, how we talk about athletes and how we report on people, if as old school white reporters reporting on young Black athletes that weren't as well, they weren't Terry Porter and Clyde Drexler. We'll put it that way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's another huge aspect, I think, to this, too, even in the documentary. And this is in the trailer for it. No spoilers. Everybody who wants to go watch it. But even Rashid is like, I didn't go to jail. Bonzi didn't go to jail. Sabonis didn't go, Damon didn't go to jail. Nobody went to jail, yet they got this moniker of the Jailblazers, which is just kind of crazy.
And how'd they get that, Greg? How did they get that moniker? It's actually really interesting how they got it. It was the Wilmette Weekly. There was a reporter in 1996 that wrote this article branding them the Jailblazers. And that really stuck. And as the team got better and better and better, the relationship with the Oregon media got worse and worse and worse. And again, I learned a lot about Oregon. I mean, it seems like you're from Oregon. I didn't really know. I view Oregon as a very liberal, progressive, hippie place. And I guess maybe that's just that seems like it's more Northwest Oregon, and that the state as a whole has a lot of different types of people. And some of those people might not be the cliche Oregon night that I think of as maybe more of a Portland night. So it's really interesting to learn more about your state and some of the history of that state, because the character of Oregon plays a big part in that story and how those guys were treated during that time.
And it's a very important part of that, of how that narrative, started here and then went national. I think that's something that even people here may not realize, that was a term created locally. Not some national, not New York decided to do that and then, it's got adopted here. That started here locally. So yeah, I think that's a really good juxtaposition, something that you definitely explore, in the documentary. What was one of the most surprising things that you kind of found going down that road?
Just the beginning of the documentary, as you'll see, which it's on the Underdog Originals YouTube channel. It is free for all to consume. You can access it. And that's why we love YouTube. That's why we really focus on creating content for YouTube, is we want to give everybody this kind of access to characters like Rashid and Bonzi. But yeah, one of the first things that they talk about is the relationship between the team and the police and the local journalists. And what Rashid and Bonzi claim is that there were reporters in the bars and restaurants that they frequented, and that when they left, the police were alerted by the local journalists that whoever was on that team, that Jailblazers team, was leaving, and that they were pulled over religiously after games, after they got back from flights, and that the police and local journalists were playing this game and to try and incriminate them. And I'd love to hear if you have any police from that era, or different journalists that from that era. I'd love to hear their thoughts on whether or not that is true. Because I'd love to hear your thoughts, Greg.
I mean, I don't have any thoughts or personal contact with anybody from that era, but I think that would be a great follow-up, is to kind of get some feedback on that and just where that was. I mean, there's no question they were in the news all the time. And even one of the biggest instances, I would say, is probably, the Rashid and Damon Stoudemire getting pulled over coming back from Seattle from that Sonics game, and something that was covered extensively. And it made it out to be, even just false memories of that, it made it out to be that they were just, smoking weed in their car and just driving down the road like crazy. And that really just wasn't the case. And I thought it was really fascinating hearing Rashid kind of address that and go down that road and explain what really happened and how that narrative changed, and just how he didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal.
And looking back 20 years later, this was really, the crimes committed were marijuana smoking in Oregon, which is pretty laughable. And Rashid and Bonzi talked about the Bill Walton versus them, and how Bill Walton, after you guys won the 77 title, this is a guy who very openly enjoyed his marijuana, and he was treated a lot differently than a lot of players in this team were when they got in trouble and had issues with their THC consumption. And so looking at that juxtaposition between Damon and Rasheed and Bonzi versus Walton, yeah, it's just all really interesting. As you said earlier, Rasheed makes the point that none of them went to jail during this era.
Yeah.
Even that incident, which was probably the biggest incident, Damon also tried to go through airport security with marijuana wrapped in tinfoil. I keep saying marijuana.
Right.
Sound very square, but I'm gonna roll with it. So yeah, these guys liked weed and they played basketball hard and they played basketball the right way and they played basketball in a beautiful way, and that all got lost because of their reputation and because of the way that they were reported on. And so if you look at now where we have a lot more awareness when it comes to how the media portrays athletes specifically in our realm, it's really interesting to look at how they were written about at that time, because a lot of these articles are public. You can go back and look at the Oregonian and look at different writers and how they wrote about these guys, and the vitriol behind the reporting is shocking, and really 20 years later has not aged very well, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, just an example of that kind of coverage, you look at like Rasheed Wallace when he was at his prime, he's a character no matter what. And he had his catchphrases, his CTC and ball don't lie and all that stuff, which people still say to this day. And now he was covered though as just kind of this villain, like that was my impression anyway during that time frame. It seemed like he was the Jailblazer. He was the villain. He was kind of the leader of that. But then you flash forward, several years later, you have Marshawn Lynch also doing, I'm just here so I don't get fined. And it's like, oh, he has this kind of a lovable take of this guy doing pretty much the same thing, just saying, I don't want to answer your questions. And just kind of those two different viewpoints, I feel like, just over that short amount of time, or 10 years, whatever it was, for that change. Just seeing that kind of narrative change is kind of fascinating.
It's fascinating. It really is. Just how I think the Jailblazers in this era, first off, they wouldn't be called the Jailblazers.
Yeah.
But that team in this era would be a beloved team. And they're kind of like, the comp now might be Memphis a little bit, with that like brash, outspoken. But Memphis is about to get bounced in the first round of the playoffs. And the Jailblazers, that team, I'm going to stop saying Jailblazers, that Portland Trailblazers team of the late 90s and early 2000s was arguably the best team in the NBA. Was one bad quarter away from a potential dynasty. So yeah, they were brash, they were outspoken, but man, they were fun. And what an incredible basketball team. If you go back and watch the tape, just such a well put together basketball team, just such a great mix of veterans and young talent with Steve Smith and Scottie Pippen and Greg Anthony and some of the OGs in that team. It was really an awesome team. That story is a really important story, because it's really a story about race in the media. Basketball is very, very much in the background when you dive deep into the story, into the characters.
And that's why I think this interview is so great, that you were able to get that and get these two guys to open up and to talk about that. And so you mentioned, this is the first part, and then there's a second part that's coming up. I know we don't want to spoil anything, and everybody, if you're a Blazers fan or if you're just an NBA fan or you want to follow anything like what you were talking about, just this, coverage in the media, coverage with the police, race, everything that went on there. Check out that documentary.
I'll spoil.
It's a lot. There's a lot.
It's a lot of fun stuff, because another character in this and the Whistleblower podcast that I produce and host is about Tim Donaghy and the NBA refereeing scandal. And so obviously that was the first why I wanted to reach out to Rasheed originally, because I'm doing a podcast about NBA referees and I wanted him. And there was an incident between Tim Donaghy and Rasheed Wallace, where Rasheed told Donaghy that he was cheating. And obviously that turned out to be correct.
Yeah.
And that's how I got to know Rasheed. And we get into in the second half of the interview about referees. And if you've really studied the NBA and you've studied David Stern, and you're a Portland fan, especially if you're a Portland fan or a Sacramento fan, you really hate the Lakers. And you go back to David Stern's dream saying on the Dan Patrick Show, I believe in 2002, 2004, Dan Patrick asked David Stern what his dream NBA Finals matchup is or would be, and Stern said Lakers versus Lakers. And then you look at how those games were officiated, and you look at Rasheed and just how he fits in. So the second half of that interview, we get into referees. And for me, that was just fascinating. I think we're going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 viral moments once that's released. I'm really interested to see how NBA Twitter reacts to that interview, because Rasheed does not hold back when it comes to his experience in referees. So we dive more into the team. We dive more into other characters in the team. Scottie Pippen's just such an interesting character, and how his legacy would have changed had he been able to win that seventh ring and get one without Jordan. There's just so many other interesting stories that we get into about the team. The first part really does, I hope, encapsulate the dynamic between the media and the team and the city and the state of Oregon, and some of the things that I certainly didn't know about the state and about the environment. What it's like playing in Portland as a black man in a state that is only 2% black. It's just, there's some really interesting societal stuff that we get into. And then, as the second part of this, and we cut some of these as shorts. So some of them are less than a minute. Some of those moments that we want to make really digestible and shareable for the audience. There's just some great 1-minute stories in there too that we're going to be releasing on that channel.
Well, and that's coming up. I don't know if there's a release date on that you can say, or just stay tuned.
2-ish weeks.
Okay.
Everything. Nice thing about YouTube too is I got my team working on it, and I know how hard they work, and it'll get done as soon as we can.
Yep.
But it'll be soon, and if you keep an eye on our Originals channel, on the Underdog Originals channel, then you'll see more and more Jailblazers content popping up over the next couple of weeks. We're going to keep it coming.
Do you think that this is something? I mean, Bonzi and Sheed, that's amazing. Is it somewhere down the line? Could you imagine doing this as like a full length, documentary, getting all of those other sides of the story in there, talking to Damon or any of the other Blazers from that team?
Yeah, Damon was supposed to be there. Damon, we filmed this interview actually about 6 months ago when Damon was on the Boston Celtics coaching staff. And if you remember what was happening with the Boston Celtics coaching staff about 6 months ago, you'll understand why Damon had to back out last minute. But Damon was supposed to be there too. These guys really want to tell this story. And look, Damon's from Portland. Damon is a native Oregonian. Damon wants to talk arguably more than Sheed and Bonzi about this era and about his experience. And a lot of these guys, Damon and Bonzi, were really held back as they left the NBA and tried to embark on the next step in their life and career. The reputation that they, I won't say the word earned, the reputation that they were, that was bequeathed upon them back in this era, back in their Portland days, really affected them, and affected them emotionally, affected them financially, and their careers were affected by the way that they were portrayed in the media during this time. So yeah, Damon, I want to interview. The way we would produce this as a documentary is obviously interviewing all the players, and look, I want to talk to the Portland media, to guys like Kerry Eggers and other reporters that reported on this team during the time. And so, yeah, my hope is, and that's how we kind of phrase it, is looking at this as, sorry, they're hammering outside my door. I don't know if you caught that. The way we want to build this, the way we want to do this is, we want to do this as a full-length documentary. And we produce this first little sliver and put it out on our YouTube page to see what if fans would comment and really clamor for more. And the feedback so far has been incredible.
Oh yeah, I mean it's so great. Just hearing their side of it and just kind of getting some more information out there about that it's not just this era where everybody was in jail and they weren't, and all of that stuff. Kind of giving some clarification to this really interesting era of Trailblazers basketball in the NBA and just everything in general. And Tim, great job on that too, of getting those two guys to talk and really open up, and fascinating documentary. And so part 2 is going to be coming out here 2-ish weeks. We'll follow along with that. Tim, anything else you want to add in for anybody who's going to watch this, maybe for the first time, maybe somebody who's not an NBA fan, like why would they want to watch it?
I think, well, if you're a Portland fan, that's the interesting thing about YouTube, about being able to interact with our fans. The comments on this, usually they tell you if you're in content, don't read the comments.
Yeah.
The comments on this have been just, there are so many people that want this story. And yeah, if you're not a basketball fan, then there's still some really prescient issues and prescient things in this piece that relate broader societal issues that I think you would find really interesting. And if you're a basketball fan, then this is a story that you should know a little bit about, and we're going to reveal a lot more about it when you watch this piece.
Well, Tim, thank you very much for taking some time to talk with us. I know you have a lot going on, and just appreciate it. Looking forward to what's coming out here in the next couple of weeks, and anything else you have going. We would love to talk to you more, as we can, maybe when we get this other part out.
Appreciate it, Greg. Sorry about the hammering.
That's all good.
Hopefully you guys didn't catch any of that.
Nope, it was great. Tim, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
And for everybody tuning in, appreciate you joining us. This is Fox 12 Now, so this is our new streaming show here at Fox 12 Oregon, where I'm going to be here. You kind of see what's going on in the background. There's the newsroom happening, and we get to go in depth with some of these news stories that you want to talk about, and just like this one. I mean, talk about a great story to talk about, the Jailblazers, and just these interviews that are out there. So we'll have lots more like this coming up. So make sure you follow along whatever platform you're on. Hit subscribe, or remember to come back here. I'm Greg Nibbler for Fox 12 Oregon. Thanks for watching.